Hi, I'm Erica Lembke from the University of Missouri, and this Project STAIR tailored video is going to give more information about how to use a decision-making flowchart to help you once you have that data. This particular video will follow up on a previous STAIR tailored that we did that was more broadly about decision making. This video in particular today will really focus on using a flowchart, and I would say that it's particularly helpful for teachers who are participating in our STAIR program. It will walk you through specific measures, processes that we'll be talking about as we utilize the data for STAIR. Please continue to use either of these decision-making videos as you consider decision-making for your data. So first, we're going to be thinking about this decision-making process and how this fits in our STAIR process. A really important component of Project STAIR is data-based individualization, or DBI. Essentially, we want to make better decisions and inform our instruction by considering student data. When using individual student data to make decisions, this flowchart can be really helpful to you to refer to as it takes you sort of through each step of that process, considering decisions, whether decisions are either yes for particular students or no. In most cases, these yes and no mean whether students are responsive or not, to consider what decision to make next. We know that in a DBI process, using your data and making decisions is really essential. That's really one of the most important pieces. So this flowchart will be a nice aid to you. Let's apply this flowchart using some sample data. So here we see three different graphs. These are graphs all from the same student, but three different measures. And we're going to apply the data that we currently have to, one, ensure we have enough data, and two, to make a reasonable decision. So on these three graphs, we have data from quantity discrimination measures, from number properties measures, from proportional reasoning measures. And we first want to consider, do we have enough data to actually make this decision? We're looking at to see, do we have 4 to 6 data points ideally before we're going to use the data to make decisions. So we look across at each of our graphs, each different measure that's been given to make sure that we have enough data. You can see that this student, we have first collected some initial baseline data. So you can see over here, we've got these 3 baseline data points for this student. There's actually a vertical line separating the baseline data from the weekly progress monitoring data. Following the baseline data, this student actually has, 5 data points for each of these measures. So when we apply the decision rule, do we have enough data? Do we have 4 to 6 data points? In this case, the answer is yes. You can also see on these graphs that we have 2 other lines that we should refer to. One, for each of the measures, we have this goal line that we've been set. This is based on norms for the particular measures. In addition, there's a trend line. You can see here's a trend line that's mapped into the data points so that we can compare trend of the data compared to the goal line. So we're going to look at the trend line for each of the measures. On these graphs, it's represented in gray, and it gives you a really nice visual representation of what the data is looking like, because sometimes these data points, you can see they're sort of up and down, and it's hard to make sense of them. We really want to think about overall, what is the trend of that data showing? Not necessarily each individual data point, but overall, what is that sort of sense or trend of where that, of how the student's performing. Based on the student's performance on the universal screening measure that was given at the beginning of the year, we then consider whether we're going to use all 3 measures Or if the student scored below the 10th percentile on the screening tasks, then we're only going to look at the quantity discrimination measure. In this case, I'm providing you the information that the student did in fact score above the 10th percentile, so we're going to actually consider all three measures as we move forward. And again, these steps, what I'm illustrating, these are all provided for you in this decision-making flowchart. So following our flow chart, one, we've ensured that we have 4 to 6 data points. We've looked briefly at the trend lines, and we're going to use all three graphs to make a decision. So next, we're going to consider the trend lines more specifically. As you can see on the decision-making flowchart, we really have 3 choices as we examine trend line compared to goal line. One choice is if the majority of the trend lines are steeper than the goal line, that means the student's on track to perform even better than the goal we set, then we're going to consider increasing the goal. The second decision-making point might be if the trend lines are mostly even with the goal lines, then the student's on track. Right now, we can stay the course. We don't need to make any changes. We continue as is. We want to monitor those graphs weekly to make sure there's not any changes. So if we stay as is, we're going to continue to monitor weekly to see if there's any changes in comparing trend to goal line. Finally, if the trend lines are flatter than the goal line, so you can sort of see that decision illustrated right here, then we know that the student is likely not on track to meet long-term goals, and we may need to make a change in instruction. So let's look more closely at that particular option if the trend lines are below the goal lines. So if the trend lines are flatter or below the goal lines, we first want to consider if the intervention was given with fidelity. And so we want to think about, yes, it was given with fidelity. No, it may not have been given fidelity. Was the intervention given as intended, as often as intended? Was the student present for the intervention? We ask our teachers sometimes to keep track of dosage, how often they meet with the student, whether the student was there, did some school activities interfere with the ability to provide the intervention? If you compare this, for instance, to a workout program, if I plan I'm going to work out 3 days a week for 30 minutes and I'm trying to lose some weight, at the end of the month, if I haven't lost any weight, I can't say it was an effective plan if I've only worked out part of the time. And so we need to make sure the students are really present for that intervention. We're really hoping that the teachers are able to stick with a plan, and ideally that intervention is provided, at least 3 times a week for about 20 minutes a time at a minimum. So we want to make sure and go back and think about, was it delivered as often as intended, with fidelity and for the time, and was the student actually there and engaged before we decide that the current instruction is not effective. Your coach can support you if you're part of our STAIR project in kind of thinking through these pieces. We then need to think about whether we're going to increase intensity, whether we might change content or skills. And there are lots of other STAIR-tailored videos that can help you make, with those changes that might need to be made in instruction, some intensification that might be needed. So let's look back at the students' data again. So remember, we're considering all 3 graphs. In this case, it looks like the trend lines, again, those are those gray lines, are all steeper than the goal lines. They're all currently above the goal lines. Number properties right here is a little flatter, but it's well above the goal. So in this case, we would go with the majority. We have 2 out of 3. that are definitely trending up from the goal. We have number properties that's a little flatter but still above the goal. The level is above the goal. So in this case, our decision would be that we would consider whether to increase the goal for this particular student, which is that's a great point to be at. That means the student's doing even better than we had predicted that he or she would be. Each student's data will be different, and so this flow chart is a really helpful guide. Your coach, if you're part of Project STAIR, can help you think through the decisions for a particular student. For this student, the teacher and coach decided to raise the goal on quantity to scrim and proportional reasoning, but decided to leave number properties as is for now and then reconsider after a few additional data points. It appears that the instructional change the teacher is implementing is effective right now. The progress the student's showing is even above where we expected that student to be. So the teacher will continue to implement, continue to monitor, and then the teacher and the coach will meet again in a few weeks to look at this decision-making flow chart again and apply it once again to the graph data. Again, thank you. This has been a STAIR tailored video on framework for decision making. You can get a lot more information from our website or follow us on Project STAIR on Twitter.